And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie. We got a big show today. We're going to do some Q&A. Lots of questions were put in, and then probably midweek, midweek next week, we'll have all new subject, all new stuff. We also got some stuff coming up probably in late August or September. We're going to do a live event and try to do one of those and see how that goes with the call-in number and etc. So everybody will get a chance to speak their piece. So before we get into the show, there's two things I want to talk about. The first one we're not going to talk about now. It'll be the second part. But there was a mob hit in Montreal yesterday, which is pretty big. And it just further shows that Montreal is not done settling out whatever problems that they have going on there. And we'll get into that a little bit. The first thing I wanted to talk about was George Anastasia. The only reason why I'm bringing this up is because somebody came to me complaining that George Anastasia had said that Frank Sheeran was lying. If you don't know who Frank Sheeran is, look him up. The Irishman, which is coming out soon with Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, etc., Joe Pesci, is the story of Frank Sheeran. And Frank Sheeran was a hitman for the mob. He worked directly for Russell Buffalino, would end up sort of being lent out to the Teamsters and Jimmy Hoffa. A big story, but apparently George Anastasia is saying that the guy's story is a lie. And George Anastasia would know a lie when he sees one, considering he wrote a book that was filled with lies. So from that aspect, I don't know where he got his information from, but the one thing that you're not hearing is that when Frank Sheeran was on his deathbed, he gave this big confession, took lie detector tests, passed those. The FBI at one point, when they were looking into the Jimmy Hoffa disappearance, put Frank Sheeran as the number one suspect. So to sit here and say, or to come out publicly and say, and for the record, I will say that I have not seen really anywhere where George Anastasia has seen this, but it doesn't surprise me. George Anastasia will go on any show that'll have him and talk about a narrative because that's what he does and that's how he makes money. So I understand it from that aspect, but the idea that somehow Frank Sheeran made up this whole story is absolute bullshit. I don't take what George Anastasia has to say as gospel in this situation, because the FBI for a long time has said that Frank Sheeran was who he says he was. The FBI had no doubts on any of the information that he said. In fact, the CIA actually pulled out transcripts proving that Frank Sheeran did in fact meet an airplane to deliver weapons, which allegedly these weapons were used in the Kennedy assassination. And so there are, and when I say the CIA brought out reports, what they brought out was the flight information. So everything that Frank said about where the airplane showed up proved to be true. So where George Anastasia seems to get this idea that it's fake and not true, I really couldn't tell you, because let me be honest about something. And this is just where I come from. And I don't care what anybody has to say. George Anastasia's a liar. That's the first problem. George Anastasia doesn't tell the truth. I was an Anastasia fan for a long time. I liked his writing. I thought his books were good. But the minute he sat down with that rat, John A. Light, and writes a book, and it's lies from beginning to fucking end, he doesn't come out to defend the lies. In fact, if you want to take it a step further, Jimmy A. Light allegedly told someone that when the book originally was going to come out, the first draft, there was a complete beginning to that where George Anastasia says, look, I can't prove any of this. This is just his word of mouth. This is his narrative and his story. And then suddenly he changed the way he wrote the beginning of the book. Obviously, he has to have his readers believe his bullshit. So once we got to the point where I literally, and this isn't me going after A-Light. This is me just bringing up the point of George Anastasia. He writes all of these fucking books, right? And he has a narrative, and he's got inside sources with the FBI. He probably gives the FBI information. I wouldn't doubt it for a fucking second. But if he's going to write a book called Gotti's Rules, and he's going to lie from A to Z throughout the book, and then there is a website you can go to, there's, first of all, you can do your own research, which I did. I never take, Chris Casparosa has a great site called JohnAlightFacts.com. You can go there and look at court transcripts yourself. It's all there in black and white. It shows that not only is Anastasia lying, but A-Light was lying as well. But I always go the extra mile when I do my show. So what I did was, after I read everything that Chris has on his site, which is 100% factual and accurate, I did my own little research. And everything that Chris said is backed up. There was even some stuff that I found that Chris has included on his site, but not as in-depth as maybe it should have been. And that's not knocking Chris. It's just, come on, what are you going to do? You can't sit there and write 1 million pages on one bullshit topic. There's too much to cover. So there is a little more to it. And the proof is that everything Chris has ever said is true. There's not a single shred of evidence that John A-Light or George Anastasia can bring up that will change the truth. And the truth is they're both liars. So once George Anastasia, once it was proven to me that George Anastasia is a liar, then I can't believe nothing he says in any of his books. Because if he's lied in this one, he's lied on every single other fucking book. And that's just the truth. George Anastasia likes to talk about a lot of things, but what George Anastasia doesn't like to do is admit that he's a liar. He doesn't like to admit that a mob rat who he's trying to sell this narrative about as to being somebody when he wasn't, it gets taken a step further when this mob rat uses threats using the author's name, and the author doesn't do anything. Yes, we've heard this 1 million times before, and I've talked about it before. But the point is that George Anastasia obviously is one of a couple of things. He's either deaf, dumb, and blind, which I have a hard time believing. Why he chose a mob rat, and this is what kills me. This guy will go on his fucking YouTube page and he'll fucking out Philadelphia guys, put names with titles and faces, which isn't fucking true. He'll do that all fucking day long, you know, and then he'll write a book with a rat where he's really just kind of dogging John Gotti Jr. and putting John fucking A-Light on some sort of imaginary fucking pedestal. He did the same kind of shit with John Vesey. You go back and listen to his fucking interviews. Oh, John Vesey. It's like he's in love with the guy. So from my perspective, and this is all where it's coming back to, is George Anastasia's full of shit. Him and Dave Ratweiser are the two biggest creep show lying pieces of shit I've ever seen. And the thing is that people are coming to me now because they're seeing it. Because they're seeing it for the bullshit it is. Now, people can respect George Anastasia and what he does. Fine, I ain't got no problem with that. The problem is the information he is putting out is a fucking lie. And that's the truth. You know, your Jerry Capishis of the world tell the FBI information. You know George Anastasia does. And people tell these guys information because they think that George Anastasia is their fucking buddy. And because he's a mob author, they're going to get their fucking next book deal or some bullshit. J.R. Rubio was going to get a deal with George Anastasia. What does that say to you? George Anastasia has made a career out of talking to rats, and he's not going to stop. But the thing is that I challenge everybody. If you don't believe me, do the research yourself. Because what you're going to find is there's gaps and holes in every story that this guy has ever written. I know street guys. I've been around street guys. None of them like George Anastasia. None of them have any respect for George Anastasia. The exact words that were used in front of me were, the guy's a fucking jerk off, doesn't know what he's talking about. You know, so there are people in this world that are going to have a beef with what I say, right? And they come to me, but they don't go to him with that shit, which is amazing to me. I could never understand that. But a lot of people are coming to me saying that they're saying now that George Anastasia is full of shit, doesn't tell the truth. And that's the thing. When you ask this guy a question, he's not going to answer it. The minute you bring up John A-Light to him, he just kind of shakes his head and mutters incoherently to himself like some senile fucking moron. And that's the end of it. So for him to come out and say that Frank Sheeran's lying is ridiculous. Frank Sheeran did tell the truth. And sure, did Frank Sheeran maybe in some kind of ways retelling the stories to his attorney and Jimmy Breslin, did he sort of maybe tongue-in-cheek it a bit? I'm sure he did, because I don't think anybody that does like a mob book is completely honest about things. I think sometimes things, and when I say not honest, what I don't mean is there's a lie involved. I mean, if Guy A tells Guy B a story and Guy B tells Guy C the story's going to change a little bit because it's your narrative. It's coming from your personal inflection. So the idea here that Frank Sheeran completely lied is ludicrous. I don't know why George Anastasia would say that. I think George Anastasia, think about it. George Anastasia, his whole career is based on writing books about bottom feeders and about nobodies and about guys who wanted to be something but couldn't. He's got every opinion from A to Z, but believe me, he writes from the perspective of rats and he writes from the perspective of law enforcement, and that's not the truth. And he'll dog people and say things about people that aren't accurate. And I found one of the things in his fucking A-Light book that he wrote was somebody had asked him at one point, did you reach out to the Gotti family and discuss this with them? Well, no, because they have their own narrative. In other words, he's a pussy. And wanted to just cover one side of the story. And that's just sort of the way that George Anastasia has carried himself for years. So I don't have any respect for the guy, and I certainly don't buy for a fucking second anything he has to say at this point. Just go look at his last Mob Talk bullshit shit down. That's what I call it, Mob Talk shit down. Go watch that, and you'll see what I mean. He names 20 fucking guys, names 20 different positions. He starts off with one narrative, and then by the end, he's so confused and delusional by his own remarks, he doesn't know what to say. That's not somebody that knows what they're talking about. Because let's face it, he doesn't need to protect himself. Nobody's going to go after him. He's a well-known author. So just start to see it for what it is. All right. The second thing is, there was a hit in Montreal yesterday. The guy that was killed, his name was Steve the Jew Ovadia, and he was shot and killed in Laval. He was found in a strip mall on Sampson Boulevard shortly after 8 p.m., obviously shot in the head. And if you don't know who Steve the Jew Ovadia is, look him up. This is sort of important. Ovadia, over the years, had been closely associated with the alleged leaders of the Rizzutos, being Leonardo Rizzuto and Stefano Solicito. He had been surveilled over the years, especially in 2015, between a meeting between Solicito and Marco Campolone. And Campolone was a 24-year-old drug dealer who was having a territory beef with other drug dealers. And shortly after that meeting, Campolone was shot and killed. Ovadia has also had ties with Andrea Scopa. If you don't know who he is, look him up. He is the alleged leader of the Calabrian clan, who has been, who are tied to the Rizzutos, but not. It's very in-depth sort of relationship there. Ovadia's name was mentioned during Scopa's bail hearing in 2017, which sort of shook Scopa a little bit. And Scopa was indicted for drug dealing, but then in May of 2017, all charges were dropped against Scopa. So what is the Calabrian clan and what's going on? It's widely believed that when the Rizzutos started taking on this Calabrian faction, there was a faction within a faction, meaning that there was a small group within the Rizzutos that were aligned with the Calabrians, and that's where all of this murder and mayhem is coming from, because let's face it, everybody's trying to take over whatever's left of the Rizzuto crime family, which is decimated at this point. And one of the beliefs now is that the Calabrians, in fact, had backed an internal faction with inside. So rather than fight from out in, they started the war from in and out. And this murder could be, in so many ways, looked at a couple different ways. Ovadia had too many ties to too many different people. It could be related right back to the Rizzutos. It could be related back to the Calabrians. You can't really tell. And with Montreal, the way that things operate is everybody kills everybody, first of all, but this guy getting killed probably isn't going to directly be related back to anybody. It's going to be one faction or the other did it. There's going to be a reason for it. I think the RCMP, Organized Crime Unit in Canada, probably realistically is going to look at this as jockeying for position. The fact that Ovadia had ties to some really high people is probably the result of why he got killed. At the end of the day, that's the result of it. He knew too many people, and he knew the leaders of both sides of the faction. And so maybe, and this is just a theory on my part, but maybe he played both sides of the fucking factory, and one side got tired of it. This is going to continue. There's also Andrengada. They're actively involved. There's Hell's Angels in Canada. There's other groups in Canada. This is... I probably need to do an entire show on Canada just because there are so many groups jockeying for position that it's going to get a little crazy. And I know what people are going to ask immediately. This is the question I always get when I talk about Canada is what does Canada still have affiliations with the Buffalo, with the Bonanos? To my knowledge, yes, but it's not like it was. And that goes back to Rizzuto getting arrested because of Joey Massino. And that has more to do with the problem with that relationship than anything. Plus, Buffalo, New York has long been a stronghold for the mob because that's drug trafficking, especially. From what I understand, the Gambinos pretty much have taken that over. But like I said, you hear a lot of different things. You never know exactly what's accurate. But it's my belief that the Bonanos no longer hold that area as well as they did. But we shall see. I think I will do a show on Canada because I think it's worth looking at. But once again, another murder in Montreal. Once again, Mafia related. And this isn't the first time we've talked about this. I think literally I've talked about this 16 or 20 times in the last year, 2 years. So I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon. Like I said, Niagara Falls, Canada, and Buffalo, those are two hot territories because that's where the drugs come into the United States. And eventually, somebody's going to win. Eventually, the Rizzutos are going to rebuild and win, or the Calabrian clan is going to just totally decimate them. But then you got Andrengada coming involved, and you've got the motorcycle gangs that are involved. So it's a really dicey situation there. And only time will tell. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to get to your questions for Q&A. Stay tuned on Mob Talk Radio. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are going to get to your Q&A. I have a lot of questions here. Some of them I had to skip. For instance, one that I did skip is the Vatican involved in organized crime. I'm just not going to. First of all, I'm Catholic, so I'm not going to get involved in that massive conspiracy theory. There's enough information out there where you can believe it or not believe it. So I'm not going to get into things like that. All right. So all that being said, if I didn't get to your question, please remind me. But the first question I'm going to try to remember here is somebody asked me the other day, and I didn't write it down, was that, did Pablo Escobar, with all the money he had, was he as powerful as mob bosses of the old days? I think Pablo Escobar was more powerful. And the reason why I say that is that the mob traditionally, could run politicians, but the mob at one point, the only president they really tried to effectively buy was John F. Kennedy, and it worked to a point. And then we saw the result is Kennedy sicked his brother Bobby on everybody, and that's exactly why they were killed. But no, Pablo Escobar, he ran his country. It was not a matter of let me grease the police. When you own the police, government officials, you even try to put yourself in as a fucking Senate member in your country. You own the president for the most part. This guy owned the country. He built a fucking prison for himself. When they said, you got to go to prison, he said, all right, I'll do that, not a problem, but let me build the prison. And of course, it was like a fucking palace prison. So the idea that the American mob bosses were as strong as Pablo Escobar, not even close. He had a strength that was completely different, but he would also kill his own community. He would bomb buildings and stuff like that. So the idea that Carlo Gambino was as strong as Pablo Escobar, maybe in terms of being able to control ports and stuff like that, but I don't think that any of those guys could touch what Pablo Escobar was able to do. Money corrupts all, and that's the way it's always been. Okay, does Chicago have any affiliation with New York? Of course. All mob families, for the most part, have affiliations everywhere. If you're asking me for specifics, I really can't give you that because I'm not privy to that information, to be honest with you. But I would imagine that there are always ties. I know that there are guys here that are tied to guys in Rhode Island, guys in Philly that are tied to Rhode Island, guys that are in Massachusetts are tied to guys to Florida. It's the reality of the nature of the business. Okay. Do the Sicilians still have their own thing, and are they still tied to the Bonanos? The Sicilians do have their own thing. However, most of them are under the umbrella of a crime family. That's the way it's always been. Whether or not specifically right this second it's like that, I don't know. As far as the Bonanos, I think the Bonanos lost. If you go back to the days of Joey Massino, they had some real power, especially within Montreal. And that goes all the way back to Joe Bonanno. However, after the Joey Massino thing and after Rizzuto went to prison for murder and all that kind of garbage, they really lost a lot of the relationship that they had. And when you take into consideration the crap that has happened just within Montreal in the last 2 years itself, I don't think that, obviously there is a connection, but I don't think that it's significant enough to warrant saying that it is, to be honest with you. I think a lot of what's going on in Canada is tied within Canada, and I don't think anybody in New York's stupid enough to even get involved in that whatsoever. But I do know that there is representation, American representation within Canada for different crime families, those being the Bonanos and the Genoveses and the Gambinos. Do mob guys still get an easy ride in prison? And they use Goodfellas as an example. First of all, if you believe that what happened in Goodfellas was real, first of all, Henry Hill's a lying sack of shit. He didn't tell the truth about anything. I don't think it was exactly like Martin Scorsese put up on the screen. But mob guys do kind of catch a break a bit. I've never been to prison, so therefore I can't really speak personally. But I have heard guys who have done a heavy length of time tell me that, they get special benefits here and there, but don't think that they're sitting on park loungers getting a tan. That's not the reality. They're still in prison. The days of smuggling in mortadella or whatever else they're going to eat isn't really the case anymore. But you can grease a CO and get what you want, from what I understand. I know a lot of people that have done time. I know people that are doing time. And they all pretty much tell me the same thing, is that they can get certain things, but the idea of lobster and wine and all that's fucking Hollywood fantasy for you 101. And that's pretty much that. All right. Oh boy. Would Salvi Testa have been a viable candidate to take over the Philadelphia mob if Nicky Scarfo wouldn't have killed him, or would have John Stampa still gotten the nod from New York to take over Philly? Salvi Testa wasn't going to live long. There's a bunch of... Okay, first of all, with Salvi Testa, he was an up-and-comer. A lot of that had to do with the fact that he was next to Nicky Scarfo. Left to his own devices, without Scarfo's power at the time, Salvi Testa wouldn't have probably been anybody. That's just the reality. The second thing you have to sort of talk about, and I'm going to mention Nicky DeCrow for a minute, only because this is what he said. These are his words, not fucking mine. That Salvi Testa was supposed to marry Joey Merlino's sister. And apparently invitations were ordered, wedding was set, everything was in the newspaper, everybody was ready for this, and then Salvi Testa backs out at the last minute. Not only does that embarrass the Merlino family, it embarrasses Nicky Scarfo, and it also embarrasses someone's daughter. To me, that's disgusting. It's vile. I don't understand how somebody could do that. But those politics of that issue aside, that was probably one of the reasons why Salvi Testa got killed. But I think more importantly, the real reason why Salvi Testa gets killed is because Nicky Scarfo was a fucking maniac. He didn't like Salvi Testa getting any sort of press, because in Philadelphia at the time, a lot of press people were looking at Salvi Testa as the next big thing, which upset a lot of people. It upset the apple cart, and it really infuriated Nicky Scarfo, because Nicky Scarfo didn't like anybody getting pressed but him. And Nicky Scarfo was a sociopath. I mean, come on, the guy pushed a fucking horse off a cliff, for Christ's sakes. So the idea that had Salvi Testa lived, he would have taken over, I don't think so. I think there's a couple of people that would have never let that happen. And as far as John Stanfa, that created a whole fucking problem in and of itself, because John Stanfa, obviously, I've always said, was in on the Bruno hit. I believe it. I've always believed it. He goes back to New York after all of that crap. And then New York effectively installs him as boss, which infuriated a lot of different people, because this is not a Philly guy. This is a guy that hasn't earned his stripes in Philadelphia. And so, of course, there's going to be a schism or a split in the faction, and that's exactly what we saw between Ralph Natale and John Stanfa. And so I don't think that Salvi Testa... First of all, if you take away Nicky Scarfo's power, and you take away the fact that Nicky Scarfo made him pretty much who he was, without Nicky Scarfo, I think Salvi Testa gets popped for a lot of different reasons. But aside from Scarfo's power, let's say Scarfo goes away and Salvi Testa's on the streets, he'd have been killed. I don't think anybody was going to put up with some of the disrespect that he created. And I'm not speaking for anybody else. It's just my opinion. But I don't think Salvi Testa would have completely taken over. And I know in the past I've sort of like questioned that myself, but I don't think so. I think there were too many people. That was a whole era with Scarfo that it's really hard to predicate an opinion on, because Scarfo was so crazy, would kill anybody, that you don't really know which way things would have technically gone at that point. But I think it's safe to say that without Scarfo, Salvi never would have gotten anywhere. And I think after the disrespect and dishonor he caused other people, it was a time clock. It was just simply a time clock. All right. Were the Angelos set up by Whitey Bulger on orders of Raymond Patriarca? Okay. I get this question more than I really like, to be honest with you. So I'm going to answer it, because somebody underneath of this on Mob Talk Radio said, oh no, Patriarca never would have done that. This is where I can speak from a place that is unknown. I don't want to say specifically how I know certain things, but this is something I can talk about at length. And what I can say is I'm not going to verify it with a yes. But what I can tell you is this, and this has not been reported anywhere. This is the God's honest truth. You're never going to hear this again out of my mouth. And this is something that has never been said by any journalist or any author in the history of New England organized crime. Ray Patriarca and Whitey Bulger had a friendship. Their friendship was based on mutual territory. Their friendship was based on narcotics trafficking. Ray Patriarca, he was leery of Whitey Bulger, but the ends always justified the means. He needed to make sure that things stayed sort of in control in Boston, and Ray Patriarca didn't trust the Angelos. Never. He never trusted them. A big part of that is because when Ray did a stretch of time, the Angelos started to piss and mark territory that was theirs that didn't belong to them. And Ray did not trust them ever. I don't care who tells you different. The truth is he did not fucking trust them. In fact, if you want to move past Ray Patriarca Jr., when the Angelos took over, what happened? The whole entire Providence mob fell fucking apart. Now, Ray Jr. didn't help that either, but the Angelos were a bunch of fucking meatheads. The minute that they moved a base of operations from Providence to Boston, they had all kinds of fucking problems. Now, question. Were the Angelos set up by Whitey Bulger on orders of Patriarca? I don't think Ray sat down with Whitey Bulger and said, listen, this is what I want you to do. Because I don't think that Ray really knew that Whitey Bulger was talking to the feds. I can tell you that because I think if that had been the case, Ray would have moved to kill him immediately. That would have happened knock on wood, fucking immediately, he would have had Whitey killed. But the point is that there were meetings that took place in the basement of Ray Patriarca's home with Whitey Bulger about this problem. Ray knew he was going away, and he wanted the Angelos watched very close because he did not trust them. And so and let's face it, the Angelos did not earn their fucking spot in the Mafia. They paid an incredible amount of money. And they had a couple of rackets on the side that Ray wanted a part of. He wanted a piece of it. So for a large sum of money, he let them come in, which, God rest his soul, I don't think that was a smart decision, but it didn't backfire on him quite as badly as it could have. So he let them buy their way in. So they didn't earn their stripes. They weren't tough guys in the street their whole life. They bought their way in. And Ray didn't trust them because of that, because they didn't earn their way. And so what happened, I think, realistically at the end of the day was Bulger did Patriarca a favor. And then that's the thing. People misappropriate this information all the time that Whitey Bulger ratted on Ray Patriarca. He never did. He could have. He could have buried Ray Patriarca a million fucking times, and he didn't. He only testified against Boston guys at the Angulo, mainly against the Angelos and the shitbags that the Angelos brought into Boston. That's really who Whitey really informed on at the end of the day. I don't want to get into Kevin Weeks and all of that shit. But, so to answer your question, do I think that Ray Patriarca told Bulger, this is what I want you to do? No, I don't think Ray ever fucking realized that Whitey was an informant. But I do think that there was a narrative and a directive of Whitey to watch over them and make sure that they don't do anything fucking twisted. So, and in a way, yes, but in a way, no. I don't think it was that explicit, but I can tell you 100% certifiable, never going to hear that anywhere else, that Whitey Bulger made sure that Ray was insulated from everything else. That was a partnership, and it was a business for a long time. Whitey couldn't have gotten the boats for the IRA without Ray Patriarca's blessing, without going to Ray and asking Ray. So they had a business relationship. They were friendly. Did they eat dinner every Sunday night together? No. But Ray trusted him enough to sort of maintain Boston. Because let's be honest. Let's use a comparison to the Westies. Paul Castellano put a fucking lock on the Westies like you wouldn't believe. The minute the Westies started to get out of control, guess what? Paul now has a problem because now they're doing whatever the fuck they want. Do you really think Ray Patriarca was going to let Whitey Bulger and the Winter Hill Gang do whatever the fuck they wanted in Boston? No, because Ray owned Boston. So when he doesn't act, doesn't do anything in those early days and lets them kind of maintain and do what they got to do and doesn't step in, doesn't get involved, why do you think that is? It's because there was a vested mutual interest financially. So the bottom line is, to answer your question, yes, I think that Patriarca definitely went to Bulger and said, I need your help, watch these guys, I don't trust them. But did he know that he was running to the FBI? Absolutely not. But when you look forward into the case and you look forward into everything else, Whitey Bulger never gave up Ray. He never gave him up. So there you go. You're not going to have anybody else tell you that. I have direct knowledge of that, so that is what it is. All right. Why do you think Dominic Mimi Cialo was killed? If you don't know who Dominic Mimi Cialo is, I'm going to tell you. He was a capo from the Colombos. He ran Coney Island. He controlled gambling, shylocking, and etc. He was a real tough guy. He was a guy you didn't want to fuck with. During the first Colombo War, he sided with the Persico side. In 1962, John Franzese got promoted to capo. Franzese handpicked Cialo to be in his crew. Then in 1967, John Sonny Franzese goes to prison and Cialo takes over as capo. Then in 1970, Cialo is arrested with 30 others for refusing to testify before a grand jury. Joe Brancato would end up taking over as Cialo went back to Coney Island so he could control gambling and loan sharking. He was a known racist, a known drunk. If he caught a black guy and a black kid or a black guy in his neighborhood, he would either baseball bat them or he would kill them without hesitation. This guy was a fucking animal. He led all the violent crews for Carmine Persico. He would actually, throughout his life, he would beat up cops and he'd get away with it because cops were terrified of the guy. People were petrified of him. But where he fucked up was there was an incident that took place in a restaurant. Carlo Gambino walks into a restaurant and Cielo was sitting over at the bar. Cielo, for whatever reason, starts yelling obscenities by calling Carlo Gambino a fucking old man. And then he literally walked up to him and asked him, "Who the fuck do you think you are?" And he would go on to be indicted for a murder with Sammy Gravano and Louis Melito. But before the trial began, Cielo suddenly disappeared. In 1974, his remains would be found inside Auto Social Club, encased in cement. So, why was he killed? I'm going to tell you why. There are going to be those who are going to tell you that Sammy Gravano killed him to try to protect his interests as far as the murder trial or the murder indictment with Louis Melito. I'm going to tell you that's not what it was. The fact that he called Carlo Gambino a fucking old man and asked him who the fuck he thought he was, that was enough to get him killed right there. I'm absolutely stunned that he was even lived further past the point where he shouldn't have. You just don't disrespect Carlo Gambino like that. He did. And he paid for it dearly. So that's exactly why Dominic Cielo was killed. All right, did Franco Cassio conspire to kill John Gotti, or was it the other way around? Okay, first of all, this comes from Sammy Gravano. This is what he said on that 60 Minutes interview with Diane Sawyer. He made some comment of, Frankie said he wanted to kill Gotti, he was going to kill the son. That's all Sammy Gravano bullshit. It's not true. Is Frankie Locascio probably pissed he's still sitting in the can? I'd imagine he is. I'd imagine he's upset that he's in prison. But at that point, why on earth would Frank Locascio have a conversation with Sammy Gravano about killing John Gotti when fucking Sammy Gravano turns right around and becomes a rat? If that's the case, why didn't fucking Sammy Gravano testify to that in federal court? That Frank Locascio had said he wanted to kill John Gotti. It's not fact. It's bullshit. It's Sammy Gravano spinning a narrative like all these fucking rats do to try to protect their interests and make them feel like what they did was right. You give them any sort of an outlet to make themselves feel better about being a piece of shit scumbag rat. That's what they're going to do. So do I believe it? No. I think reality is that If Sammy Gravano does not turn informant, I suspect, and I've always suspected that Sammy Gravano was going to be killed. I've said that. I stand by that. I don't think Sammy Gravano would have lived another 5 years under John Gotti's reign. I just don't see it. Sammy was just getting too far out there, doing too much, and I think it was going to come to a point. That's just my belief. I could be totally wrong about that. Okay. How active is the Russian Mafia in New York City? Extremely active. Brighton Beach. Why do you not hear about them? Are they structured like the Italians? No, and that's one of the big issues that the Albanians have, and that's sort of the big issue the Russians have. They're not structured. Anytime you have a large group of people, first of all, the Albanians will kill women and children. They have no fucking problem doing that. The Russians are the same way. If they were structured, they would be a problem But the problem is they're very clannish. They're designed like European Italian crime families where there's different clans and different territories. And so, no, they're not organized. And one of the big things that the Russians have going on in New York is medical fraud. They're the biggest head honchos for medical fraud, especially abusing the Medicare system, the Medicaid system. They're very good at that. They are the ringleaders for that. They're all over Brooklyn. And you don't hear about them probably as much, not because they stay off the radar, but because they're not really structured like an Italian crime family. It's hard for organized crime task force to take them over because you can't get into the crime family like that with them. The Greeks are like this too. The Greeks are, however, more organized like a traditional Italian crime family, but once again, there's like all of these different walls you have to scale and go around to try to get in, and you just can't get in. They isolate themselves incredibly well. That, and when they're not one big organization and they're little tiny like splinter cell organizations, you can never get to the top because you never know who technically is running the top. So that's as far as that goes. All right, how did the Italians end up winning over the Jewish and Irish gangs? They didn't really win them over. First of all, the Italians outnumbered them 10-1. Maybe not in the early days, but moving towards the 50s and 60s. We outnumbered them organized crime-wise, and business was good for business. If everybody could come under one umbrella and make money together, then nobody has to win anybody over. All it is it's a business transaction. It's a relationship that is fundamentally based on finances. Meyer Lansky was incredibly bright, good with numbers, wouldn't hesitate to have somebody killed. He was able to make the mob a lot of money, and so what? Because he's Jewish, the mob's going to have nothing to do with him? Bullshit. Lucky Luciano believed white, black, Hispanic, didn't matter what you were. If you're a criminal, you're a criminal, and we should all be together and not fight one another. That was what his pure belief was, because the bottom line in Lucky Luciano's eyes was, let's make fucking money together and not fight each other. And so that was his belief. That's my belief. I don't think it matters. But it wasn't so much winning over anybody. It made business sense. It made business sense. You're stronger together than you are apart. All right. How was Jimmy Burke not killed by the Mafia for all the killings he committed? Well, first of all, Jimmy Burke, one of my favorite sort of archetypes. Jimmy Burke was a tough guy. A lot of the murders that Jimmy Burke committed were mob-related. Why didn't the mob kill Jimmy Burke? Well, Jimmy Burke had so much business. He was an earner and a hitman, and the fact that he was able to bring in fucking the Lucchese crime family a ton of fucking money, and it wasn't just the Lucchese's, the Gambinos, Genovese's. He brought everybody money. When you bring people money, they can turn a blind eye to some of the crazier shit that you do. Now, if you go back to the Billy Bats when William Benveno was killed, which is ultimately one of the reasons why Tommy DeSimone gets killed in the end. Why didn't they go after Jimmy Burke? Because he was in on that. The reason why they don't is because Jimmy Burke was smart enough to put that in somebody else's ear. He knew the heat was coming. Let me put this in somebody's ear, and fuck Tommy, he can deal with it himself. But people were also scared of Jimmy Burke. And that was another reason why they didn't go after Jimmy Burke. People were afraid of him. When he makes too much money, and that's really the root of everything, the root of any murder, honest to God, you come back to any mob murder, it always comes back to money in some way or another. So they're not going to kill Jimmy Burke because Jimmy Burke is too valuable to them financially. And Jimmy Burke was doing mob hits at 16. This was a guy that could be counted on in a million different ways. And I think if you were to really tell a Jimmy Burke story or make a Jimmy Burke movie, it would be incredible, because just the odds of what happened to him as a kid and then growing up, becoming what he becomes, it's miraculous to me how he was able to survive so much and be that respected. He was a gentleman, and that's the other thing Goodfellas doesn't show. They don't show what a gentleman he was to people. I have heard stories from people that knew him that have told me that he was an incredibly nice guy, had a great laugh, was very friendly to everybody, would help people out with money, had no problems. But if you fucked with him, or you fucked with anybody he knew or cared about, it was like a fucking switch, and he'd kill you immediately. So that could be valuable in the positive and the negative, but that's why he wasn't killed. He was just too valuable to the mob at the time. All right. Why was Herbie Blitzstein killed, and who do you think likely ordered it? Okay, if you don't know who Herbie Blitzstein is, you can definitely look that up. He was muscle for Tony Spilatro out in Vegas. He was a bookmaker back in Chicago. He also fenced stolen swag and ended up really going to work for Tony Spilatro with the Hole in the Wall gang. It was Tony Spilatro, Michael Spilatro, Herbie. They formed a burglary ring with 8 other associates, and they would crash holes in the side of buildings, enter, and basically rob. There were a bunch of other members. I'm not going to read all their names. There's like 16 of them. He would end up in prison for 8 years for racketeering. In 1997, he gets whacked out in Vegas. The people who killed him were members from the Buffalo and Los Angeles crime family. And he was actually killed for his rackets. He had a lot of prostitution, bookmaking, and loan sharking rackets. And the Buffalo crime family and the Los Angeles crime family definitely wanted a part of his rackets out in Vegas, and that's why he was killed. 7 guys took part in the murder, 4 pled guilty to lesser charges, and the order came directly from Chicago, and the guy who would have ordered that would have been John DeFranco. So there you go. He was killed for his rackets. Had nothing to do with Tony Spilatro. Killed for his rackets. The order came from John DeFranco. God rest his soul. Let's see. All right. What mob family did Death Row Records and former Suge Knight attorney David Kenner work for? To my knowledge, and I've looked, I have looked this up. To my knowledge, nobody. He had a couple of like miscreant, like little mob associate guys he defended, but from my knowledge, this guy's a fucking nobody. I could be totally wrong. I made a couple of calls. Nobody's ever heard this guy's name before. I looked it up on the internet, and I saw a couple of articles. The second part of your question is, how big of a role did he play in the Mafia? I don't think at all. I think this is a guy that probably knew mob guys, but I don't think he was really... I just don't see him as being anything really special, to be honest with you. I could be totally wrong. There's just not a lot of information out there. But what I can tell you is, going from the mob to Suge Knight's a fucking joke. I'm just going to be honest with you. But that's just my opinion. I'm sure people aren't going to like that opinion. All right. Do you know anything about the relationship with the Irish Republican Army and Mafia back in the day? Yes. Whitey Bulger, Ray Patriarca loosely because he allowed it, but Whitey Bulger had a big fucking... he would raise money every year for the IRA. He would send grenades, weapons, machine guns, etc. He would send them over to Ireland. Actually, a freighter ship was actually pulled over at one point, and he got caught. And he would also use those freighter ships coming in from Ireland, going out from Ireland to put massive amounts of marijuana on. But the relationship between the IRA and Whitey Bulger is huge. That's always been huge. Let's see. Okay, Joe Doherty was a high-ranking IRA guy who was on the run. He was given a New York construction job. Who provided that? To my knowledge, nobody. I did a lot of research on this. If there was going to be anybody that helped this guy out, it probably would have been Jimmy Coonan. That was a guy, but see, Jimmy Coonan was, while Irish, seemed to identify more with the Italians than he did the Irish, and that's what caused a problem between him and Mickey Featherstone in the end. But if there was anybody that was able to get this guy a job to kind of keep him under the radar, it would have been Jimmy Coonan, but it would have cost a pretty penny. So can't really be for certain, but that's likely who would have been the guy that could have done that. And who knows, maybe Whitey Bulger knew the guy and made a call and it was worked out that way. I can't really be specific because that's going back probably further than I can get information on. All right. Let's see. American Mafia versus the compare the American Mafia to the Rizzutos between level 1 to 10. I'm not exactly what this means, but if you're asking me in comparisons to American mob families of the Rizzutos, how close do they come? Rizzutos come pretty close. The Rizzutos had a lot of power. They were global, and that's theirs between them. That is a big difference between them and American Mafia. The Gambinos aren't in Germany. The Gambinos is probably stretched as far as Florida and probably go to Canada, and it stops right about there. The Rizzutos were all over Europe, Germany, fucking Saudi Arabia, of all fucking weird places. The Rizzutos were global. They were a global mob. So it wasn't just, yes, their territory was all of Canada, but they stretched into Europe like you have no idea. And Drenggina is the same way. They're all over the fucking world. The Rizzutos had representation in South Africa, for Christ's sake. So in comparison to how far they were able to reach, there is no comparisons. The Rizzutos run that from that aspect. But if you wanted to look in terms of them money-making wise, I think the Rizzutos probably made as much as combined between the Genoveses and fucking Genoveses and the Gambinos. I think they made more money. But I think that's pretty much where it stops. It's kind of hard because, when you're talking global, this isn't like, New York is New York, guys. Maybe representation in Massachusetts, Maine, Rhode Island, Florida. There's a big difference between those places and fucking globally. And the Rizzutos, Vito Rizzuto had a fucking gazillion dollars. Forget about how much money this guy fucking had. And he had power where he could clip other people in other countries. That's pretty insane. But in every other category, they're very comparable. But one was global and one was just really, for the most part, the United States. All right. Was Sammy Gravano the top guy during the construction boom? For the Gambino, sure. Tony Salerno, he couldn't touch Tony Salerno's dick if he wanted to. Tony Salerno was the fucking man as far as construction goes. Tony Salerno was the fucking man in the numbers racket. And I know we're not talking about the numbers racket, but Tony Salerno was crafty, smart, and I don't think Sammy Gravano came near him money-wise as far as construction. But in Manhattan, the word was in the 80s, if there was a building going up, Sammy Gravano had an interest in it. You also can't discount the Genovese crime family either. Everybody was relatable construction-wise, but I think the two guys that really made the most during the construction boom, first would have been Tony Salerno, and then Sammy Gravano second behind him, I think. And I think that's a fair assessment. All right. Oh, fuck. Here we go. Now, see, somebody had to go and ruin my day by bringing up this fucking jerk off. All right. What's your opinion of Michael Franzese compared to Philip Leonetti? Who do you respect or like more? I don't like either one of those cocksuckers. Are you kidding me? Philip Leonetti with his fucking goddamn fucking Frank Vincent wig on TV. That guy's a fucking nutcase. Oh, my God. Did this guy fucking whacks some lady's fucking boyfriend and then starts dating her and doesn't see the fucking irony in that? Look, Philip Leonetti is a piece of shit, rat, scumbag, fuck. Now, I know what people are going to say, but Jeff, Michael Franzese didn't testify against anybody. Actually, he did. Michael doesn't like to tell this story, but so I will go ahead and fucking tell it. First of all, Michael Franzese is a big mouth and he's a liar. That gas tax scheme that Michael Franzese allegedly devised really wasn't his. It was a Russian's. He tried to basically shake down this Russian guy, and gas pipe Cassio stepped in and says, you're not going to do that, Michael, or you're going to be fucking killed. So Michael backed down. And then there was an agreement where the gas tax scheme would be shared with all the mob. So this little fucking fairy tale that Michael Franzese likes to fucking tell, that he invented it, one, it's a lie. Two, he talks about going to an Ivy League college. That's a fucking lie. All right? So that third lie is he beat John Gotti's ass in cards and shook him out of a property. That's another fucking lie. Michael Franzese is a fucking liar. That's all he's ever been. That's all he's ever gonna fucking be. Also, Michael Franzese did testify against people in court. And here's what happened. There's a guy named Norby Walters, who was basically shaking down the Jackson 5, Dionne Warwick, and a bunch of other singers. And Michael testified against this guy, who Michael has a history of saying that this guy was like an uncle to me. But he didn't hesitate fucking ratting him out, testifying against him in court, where Norby Walters got like something like 10 to 12 years in fucking federal prison. Then he testifies against his father's janitor. Who does that? Who tells on a fucking janitor? So, when Michael Franzese tries to tell people he never testified, he's fucking lying. There's a Vanity Fair article where he admits to it. Then, to make things even fucking better, Michael Franzese gave the name of mob guys, made members, to the FBI. And he's not a fucking rat. So when he sits there and he tells this I am God the Father bullshit speech, because he's on this holy roller scheme now, which is just another pyramid scheme, when he sits there and honestly says, well, I never testified against anybody, he's fucking lying. I have been very vocal about that. The guy's a fucking rat. He gave up fucking made guy. You know what? Somebody send him this show. Because you know what he did? When I talked about this shit the first fucking time, he sends me this message. I don't know why you're being so mean to me. We don't know each other. Because you're a rat. You gave up people's fucking names. You gave up made guys' names to the FBI. It's a fucking rat move. His whole counterclaim to any of this is, well, I never testified against a Mafia member in court. No, but you testified against Norby Walters, your fucking uncle, or who you said was your fucking uncle, who was associated with the mob. You ratted him out. You testified against him. He got fucking 20 years in prison. That's not a rat fucking move? Please. He likes to invent this shit that he's the world's brightest dunce. He's not. He tried to steal a gas tax scheme. He didn't invent this shit, but he's going to tell everybody that. He is the John Alite of the... Him and John Alite ought to date. I'm convinced of it, because they're both fucking delusional. Philip Leonetti's a piece of shit. I got nothing to really say about him. Who do I respect more? I don't respect rats. I don't respect people who tell on other fucking people. I don't give a fuck about both of them. Let them fucking die. I don't give a fuck. You can't even really compare the two. Philip Leonetti, he at least killed people. This guy Franzese, I don't think he was capable of fucking flicking a fucking toothpick at somebody. This guy wasn't a fucking violent guy. He talks all this crazy shit, but he's full of shit. They're all full of shit. All right. I don't want to talk about that guy no more. All right. Do you think it would help or hurt the mob if the hierarchy only served a certain length of time? No, I don't think either way it makes a bit of difference. I think, look, guys are going to take over a role until they either go to jail, they're arrested, killed, or they die. That's just the way it is. I don't think it should be like a 4-year term like a president. If that's the case, you're going to see so much turnover. And the mob has a very creative way of ensuring that people don't keep something for as long as they actually have to. It's called killing a motherfucker. All right. Oh, yeah, here we go. You guys are really going to love this question, right? All right. What do you think the Latin Kings think of a mob rat, John A. Light, getting a pedophile to make threats using their name? All right. First things first. John A. Light has a history of making threats to everybody. I think we've talked about that enough on this show. But what this question specifically is referring to is John A. Light went to a known pedophile named John Parsons, along with Mike Jacobs. They both asked this pedophile, John Parsons, to call Chris Casparosa on the phone. And this guy left a voicemail that the Sicilians were fucking angry and someone was gonna get hurt and everybody needed to be friendly. As if a fucking Sicilian from Italy is gonna call and give a fuck about that John A. Light piece of shit. All right? But the problem was, threat's a threat, right? And not only does this asshole John Parsons, who is a fucking pedophile, not only does he call on behalf of his buddy John A. Light, because John A. Light said all over social media they've been friends for 30 fucking years. Mike Jacobs knew he was a pedophile too, didn't distance himself from that. But then this guy John Parsons says the Latin Kings are going to come after everybody. That's got to be the stupidest shit. And John Parsons just didn't use fucking the Latin Kings as a threat. He used guys in Philadelphia. He mentioned them by name. And I wish I could sit here and tell you the names he used, because I think if I did, he's going to have a problem. And I may know people he talked about. And that's not too bright when you're a pedophile. But using the Latin Kings, well, let me explain how this is going to go down, because I know people that are involved in that. I've known people like that my whole life. And let me just say this. If you're going to use the Latin Kings as some sort of threat, how stupid are you? Because the minute that they find out you're a fucking pedophile, if they don't kill you themselves or throw you a severe fucking head cracking, you're asking. People are so stupid. The Latin Kings are going to come after you. I'm a pedophile. They're not going to care about that. The fuck if they won't. Because listen, fucking pedophile is the lowest form of fucking entity on this planet. Even in prison, you know what they do to fucks like you, Parsons. You know what they do to you. So you're going to issue threats using made guys' names, allegedly made guys' names in Philadelphia. You're going to use their names. You're going to use the Latin Kings. You're going to use all of these names, and you're a goddamn pedophile. How stupid are you? Because even criminals don't fucking like you for what you've done. And if you want to debate, because that's what you're going to do, you're going to come back with, I'm going to sue you. Motherfucker, I got your fucking court files. Let's put those out. See what you did to somebody under the age of 13 for 3 fucking years, you sick fuck. And these are the people that A-Light and Mike Jacobs and the Jared Hams of the world like. Kid touchers. Oh, you can't call me a pedophile because, motherfucker, I got your case files. What you did to somebody under the age of 13 for years, you sick for your own sexual gratification. Those are the court's words, not mine. You piece of shit fuck. So what do I think people think of a guy like that? What do I think the Latin Kings think? I think this guy ought to not say a word to them. I think you ought to stay out of their neighborhood. Oh, I guess they kind of know now. I think you also want to stop using people's names he doesn't obviously fucking know. What is this world coming to? Not even a tough guy has to use other people's names to threaten people. It's like pulling a card from A-Light, because that's what A-Light does. He makes threats. Ooh, tough guy. You know, he'll attack somebody's mother. He'll attack somebody's grandmother. He'll attack somebody's fucking brother. He'll attack somebody's fucking father or uncle, because he's too much of a bitch to do it himself. Because the first thing that fucking happens, God's honest fucking truth right here. The first thing that happens when you go after John A. Whitey, he calls his FBI handler. Because he's a coward. He's a coward and a pussy. He can't take it. So the minute you threaten him or you go straight to him to talk about a fucking problem, first thing he does is runs to the FBI. Help me, someone's gonna hurt me. He's a pussy. Just like your fucking Jacobs of the world, just like your Jared Hams of the world, and just like your fucking John Parsons. That's the only way that I can answer that. All right, next question. What caused the overall decline in honor and loyalty? Some have told me drugs. Rats. That's the answer to that. In a nutshell, I could get on a whole fucking thing about loyalty and honor and respect, because I don't think a lot of people have that these days. Can drugs have an effect on that, or drug trafficking? I don't think so. I think it really honestly comes down to rats. People don't want to do time. People feel like they get arrested. It's everybody else's fault but their own, because they're not men. They're dogs, they're cowards, and they're rats. That's how I answer that. I don't think drugs really is the overall problem. The fact is they're picking men, or they're picking rats and dogs to be men, and they're not men. All right. Overall opinion. Who wins? Tony Accardo versus Carlo Gambino. Oh, boy. I think Gambino. Bruno versus the Detroit Partnership. Detroit. Luciano versus Gigante. Luciano. Buffalino versus Trafficante. Buffalino, hands down. Buffalino would kill all of them as far as I'm concerned. All right. Is it true that Neil Delacroix was beaten up by the Gallows? Absolutely not. I don't know where that comes from, but that never fucking happened ever. Albert Anastasia killed over 1,000 people. Is that true? No. Albert Anastasia did not kill 1,000 men on his own. Murder Incorporated probably killed 1,000 men on their own, which you could sort of credit Albert Anastasia as being one of the ringleaders of that, but he did not physically kill 1,000 people on his own. That's a stretch. Lucky Luciano, was he poisoned? Absolutely not. Lucky Luciano was not poisoned. Personal favorite mob book. My personal favorite mob book really is anything written by T.J. English. Scott Deitch is also an incredible writer as well. He's one of my new favorite writers. I think that Scott Deitch just recently wrote New Jersey Gangland. I don't quote me on the title. I could be wrong, but he's a great writer. He's also written on the Tampa mob as well. But my favorite mob book of all times by T.J. English is Havana Nocturne. If you want to read anything about the mob's infiltration into Cuba, Batista, Fidel Castro, Luciano, Havana Nocturne by T.J. English is the best mob book I've ever read. Written. I didn't write that. All right. Do mob guys in New York City still hang out in Utica? Of course. A lot of mob guys that work in the city live out of the city, Connecticut, Rhode Island. So, there you go. Is there Italian organized crime in Argentina? Absolutely. Andrangheta has a huge foothold. Even back as far, not back as far, but in 2006, a bunch of them were arrested for cocaine trafficking. There was a network that was set up between Argentina, Spain, and Italy, and it was a drug hub via Spain, Milan, and Turin, Italy. So, yes, they are in Argentina as we speak. That's pretty much all the questions that we have for the day. I got a whole bunch of them, but here's what we're going to do for next week. We're obviously, go ahead and submit more questions. I'll answer more questions, and we're going to do a new show on a different topic. And also coming up, we're going to do a live show. It's going to be very interesting. I have to work out one or two little issues with it, just because I personally don't want my fucking phone number out everywhere, to be honest with you. So I'm probably going to buy a Skype number, and we'll do it that way. But in the meantime, Follow me on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. Check us out on Facebook at Mob Talk Radio. Give us a like, subscribe, send all your threats, hatred, compliments, and comments over to me at the usual places. Other than that, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to like fucking address while I'm at it. Also, we are going to be doing... okay, when I say film, I'm going to be very loose in how I say that. Yes, I am doing sort of a film documentary kind of thing, but it's not going to be like a documentary that you go on YouTube, sit and watch. It's going to be highly interactive, which will involve myself and a couple other people. But until I can definitely solidify that for 100%, I don't want to get in, too far ahead of myself. And I got some other projects that are coming up and coming out that should be fun, but it's all going to be mob oriented. Obviously, there is other stuff that I do, but that's just that's not ready for to be unveiled quite yet. So all that being said, you know how to reach out. If you want to submit a question to the Q&A, do it to me in a private message on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. Check us out on Facebook. Do me a favor, please just spread the word. All I ask is that even if you hate our shit, share it anyway. Share. That's what enables me to do this for free, is people sharing stuff. So keep sharing, and I think that's it. We'll see everybody next week.